Hello and welcome to the fourth edition of our Investment Insights series, Magellan Minutes. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we've found ourselves broadcasting via Zoom yet again. The challenging times continue, but we are hopeful that we'll be back in studio soon. My name is Jennifer Herbert, Key Account Manager at Magellan, and in this session, I'll be talking with Dom Giuliano, Deputy CIO, Head of ESG and Portfolio Manager. We'll be discussing the United Nations Climate Change Conference, ESG progress globally, and Magellan's role in helping our companies tackle ESG challenges. Thanks for joining us, Dom.
Good morning, Jen.
Dom, I'd like to touch on the recent United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP26, as it's widely known, which was held in Glasgow. While we did see the Paris Agreement come out of the 2015 conference, the effectiveness of these meetings has been widely debated. Were there any significant milestones achieved at the last meeting? And what are your thoughts on this initiative more broadly?
So thanks, Jen. I think perhaps the best way to start answering the question is just to ask, what does COP stand for? It's an acronym that everyone uses. It actually stands for Conference of the Parties. So the question is, parties to what? It's actually referring to the original United Nations framework for climate change, which was an agreement signed way back in 1992 by over 200 signatories. And so every year, those signatories meet and discuss how they're executing on that original agreement. And that agreement was very far-sighted. It was all about acknowledging that man was causing climate risk and how to deal with the mitigation of that. Now, not every annual meeting of COP is going to generate some really big, significant changes. We all know about Kyoto. We all know about Paris Accord. This year, Glasgow is not going to be as consequential, but there were a few interesting things to come out of it. Well, I think there's really three things that we want to think about. The first is that at Glasgow, more science was discussed, and it was universally acknowledged that the world is behind the eight ball. There is urgency. So right now, the world is sitting at about 1.2 degrees above the levels of pre-industrialization in terms of temperature. And you might recall I just said that Paris is targeting 1.5 to 2. So we're not far from that lower bound. And so there's an incredible recognition that people and countries need to do more sooner. And so one of the outputs of Glasgow is that at the next COP, countries are going to come back with more aggressive targets, particularly by 2030, but then providing even stronger targets to get to what is now known as net zero emissions by 2050. It's important to understand that where the world is tracking right now, we're probably going to hit 2.5 to 2.7 degrees, which is well above that 2 degrees. And it's really going to have some really nasty impacts on ecosystems and the world if we don't pull it back. However, it's not all bad. Had the Paris Accord not come in, the world would probably be tracking at 4 degrees, which would absolutely be calamitous. So that's the first thing that come out of Glasgow, urgent recognition that more needs to be done sooner. The second thing that came out of Glasgow, which I think is worth pointing out, is that, I know this sounds crazy, but for the first time at one of these COP meetings, the impact of coal and fossil fuels was formally acknowledged in writing. And so one of the outputs from Glasgow was that countries will commit to phasing down the use of fossil fuels. And the third important thing to come out of Glasgow was that developed countries are stepping up the commitment to provide assistance to developing countries. We've been lagging, frankly. We're only at about 80 billion US back in 2018-19, and we've promised 100 billion. And so that assistance is going to be ramping up. Now, that's all of the formal stuff, Jen. But at these conferences, there's always a whole bunch of side agreements and discussions which are also really important. And there were a couple of interesting ones which popped out of that. The first one, which is notable, is that more than 100 countries signed up to reduce their methane emissions by more than 30% by 2030 on 2020 levels. And that's really important because methane hangs around in the atmosphere for a very long time. Another thing which came out was, there's a whole bunch of countries signed up to reducing deforestation and increasing reforestation. And then the last really important thing to come out is China and America, the two largest polluters, said that they're going to work together more on things like methane reduction and clean energy.
Dom, thank you. That was excellent. It was very, very clear. Is Magellan a member or a signatory of any responsible investment bodies, like, for example, the UNPRI?
Yeah, so Magellan is a signatory to a couple of conventions and organisations. So we are signatories to the UNPRI, and we've signed the Montreal protocol as well. So we've made a pledge under that. And we're also signatories to the Carbon Disclosure Project. And those two things combined mean that as an organisation, Magellan Financial Group actually reports its carbon footprints and efforts annually in our annual report, and that's online. It's publicly disclosed. As well, we actually measure the carbon intensity and footprint of our strategies and our portfolios, and we disclose those annually and for some strategies even more regularly in our fund updates.
Great. Dom, there's so much noise around and support for ESG improvements on a global scale, but what tangible progress has been made so far? Like, is the action and the goodwill actually fostering genuine change for the better?
Yeah, so let me just talk about two live examples. I'll go back to climate risk, and then I'll also talk a little bit about plastics as well. And, on the climate risk issue, as I said earlier, the world really is tracking at above 2 degrees. Unless we do more, we are just not going to hit the Paris Accord goals of 1.5 to 2 degrees. Just to be clear, even hitting the 1.5 to 2 degrees, that will have significant ramifications on global climates, but at least we'll be able to mitigate some of the worst impacts, and hopefully we will be able to live with the consequences of 2 degrees. On the plastic side, it's something which touches all of us. We use it every day, and unfortunately when you go down to the beach or you're taking a hike in the bush, there's too much of it around. But again, we're seeing some really good efforts around the world. Back a couple of years ago in 2019, the EU put forward a plastics directive, which actually came in force 1st of January this year. And there is a ban on single-use plastics in the EU. Things like straws, cotton bud plastics, cutlery, plates, polystyrene cups, banned, which is wonderful. There isn't a ban on plastic water bottles or drinks bottles because they're generally made out of PET plastic, which is recyclable. Now, in the EU, about 65% of those bottles are recycled, but the EU actually has plans in place that by 2030, those levels of recycling should go up to 90%, which is great. But, countries within the EU, again, are going above and beyond. So as of 1st of January, this got a few headlines. France is banning single-use plastics from the wrappings of fruit and vegetables. It's that crazy thing when you walk into the supermarket aisle and, there's a banana wrapped in plastic. It's just mad, right? That move alone by France should remove 1 billion pieces of plastic waste from their ecosystem, which is great. And then you've got countries like Belgium and Italy actually putting in place plastic levies to disincentivize use of plastics by business. So again, great news. And then even here in New South Wales, by the middle of this year, you're going to see a phase down of the use of single-use plastics, and the laws are not that dissimilar to what I just discussed in the EU. So you are seeing steps forward there.
Dom, thank you so much for sharing your insights with us today. And thank you to everyone for watching. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact one of the Magellan distribution team, and feel free to share this update with clients or colleagues as you see fit. Take care and stay safe.